please welcome to the stage Jim Zemlin.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back this morning. I appreciate all of you wearing pants today who are in attendance. For those of you who are watching online, it's all good. For those of you who went out last night locally, who were so excited to actually physically see each other again, and who are in their hotel rooms right now watching this, put your pants on and come on down to the keynote room, please. This is our first hybrid virtual physical event, and I got to admit, not that bad. I mean, I think it's been pretty fun. I've been both logging in online and seeing folks here, and I think we're going to get through all this. So it's good to see that we're able to kind of get through, even in awkward circumstances, big challenges like this. We talked a lot yesterday about on the 30th anniversary of Linux, how, history kind of oscillates between, isolationism and cooperation, and, how that pendulum will swing back and forth, and maybe we've swinged a little bit towards too much, isolationism and nationalism and things like that, and we're probably going to swing back the other way because, one of the things they teach you even in kindergarten is when you cooperate and work together, you can get better outcomes. Our first speaker is going to talk about that and a whole bunch of other things. She is a future work strategist who works with different organizations, both as a consultant and as a speaker. She has written 2 books. One on how teams innovate. It's called Disrupt Together, How Teams Consistently Innovate, and the Adaptation Advantage, which was released in the spring of 2020. As the coronavirus kind of took root in 2020, it required all of us to take a shift in how we learn, how we work, how we interact. And today, Heather is going to talk about the adaptation advantage and where we're at this stage in the virus and in the nature of how we work together. Please welcome Heather McGowan.
Good morning. Thank you all for putting pants on to be here. I know you had the option of staying in your room. Before I give my talk, I want to start by asking you folks here with pants and you folks at home without to think about and possibly jot down, because we're going to circle back to this at the end, what is your most precious resource, what is your most valuable asset, and what is your most essential investment? I think these are the 3 fundamental things we're going to be thinking about with everything going on in the world, in our lives and in our work. So jot those down, if you would. Let's start by talking about how the pandemic has accelerated things. I think this is just something we have to acknowledge straight up front. So we've been undergoing the greatest velocity of change, likely in human history, primarily driven by technology. Human adaptation has long been linear. Many of us have felt the tension as these 2 lines diverge more and more. When the pandemic first happened in March 2020, or we first acknowledged it was happening, I started seeing things change really quickly that hadn't been changing before, despite the fact that none of these technologies are really new. I wrote an article in Forbes, and I said that I thought that this moment might be the greatest catalyst for rapid business transformation in history. And because of all the tools and technologies we used over the last 18 months, or a decade or more older, I have an expression, I say digital transformation is simply human transformation. The tools come along, they prove themselves, and it seems to be taking about a decade for humans to adopt them and use them in their lives. But this pandemic forced us, we learned a lot about ourselves. It's also compressed time in some interesting ways. So if you look across a few dimensions, from how we automate tasks, our speed in which we're migrating to the cloud, our progress in digital transformation, and even the vaccine development. Vaccine developments have, on average, taken about 10 to 15 years. We measure digital transformation in 5 and 10 year increments. Accenture says we're about 20% into the cloud. They thought the remaining 80% would take about a decade. And then the Frey Osborne model and many of the other models look at 10-year horizons generally in terms of our progress in handing things off to technology. So we developed a vaccine in 10 months. How did we do it? Well, we were motivated. We had unprecedented collaboration, 18 biopharmaceutical companies working worldwide 24 hours a day. But we also had, in addition to the collaboration, we had some technologies we hadn't really used before in this way. We had the genomic sequence of the virus itself, like in a weekend or something crazy like that. We also had the ability to use computational immunology, so we could simulate what the vaccines would do in the body so we could really focus our animal and human trials. This, to me, and to everyone I've spoken to in science, I'm not a scientist, suggests we're on the cusp of a huge scientific boom. We leapt forward 5 years. In the first 60 days, we went into lockdown. Again, behavior change, according to McKinsey. And we're now migrating to the cloud about twice the speed. And if you believe the World Economic Forum, which can be a little hyperbolic in my view, they think we're going to hand off half of our work task to technology within the next, now it's like 40 years and change. If we do this, we've got to reskill about half of our workforce, not because of all those jobs are going to be replaced, but everything gets reshifted. So the single biggest question I've heard, you've all heard, over the last 6 months or more is, when are we going back and where is work going to take place? I think that's interesting. I think the last 18 months, we've learned a lot about ourselves. When we work, where we work, when we come together, why we need to come together. So it's been, outside of the tragedy of it all, it's been an interesting forced social experiment. But I think the pandemic has also questioned who works. I don't look like this dude, many of you don't. We realize that the workforce does not look like the workplace we've designed 50 or more years ago. It was designed for a white guy, probably a straight white guy with a wife at home with no caregiving responsibilities. We've seen women leave work en masse, particularly moms, because it doesn't fit them. We've seen the rise in the need for more diversity, equity, and inclusion because our workplaces are not designed for that. We work 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. Why? Why do we focus on individual productivity? What you folks do is massive collaboration on a scale that we're going to see in the rest of the workforce. You're not measured in time. Most of our tasks are not time-bound. What we do, we're going to hand off more and more things to technology, yet we still focus on training people and sorting people and hiring people for routine and solo tasks, focused on what John Hagel from Deloitte refers to as scalable efficiency. That's a world we're leaving into scalable learning. What you folks do is scalable learning. And then why do we work? We used to work for a set occupational identity. I'm going to be an X or status driver. That's changing as well. So the pandemic has created an incredible opportunity to rethink all of these things, and that's how I've organized the talk. So we're going to first talk about the workforce today, then we're going to talk about what we do for work and workforce prep, then we're going to talk about how we work and how we measure it, where work takes place, and why we work. So let's look at the workforce today. It is older, and it's older across 2 dimensions. One, we've got people living longer and therefore working longer. But we've also got younger people spending more time in formal education before they enter the workforce. So we've got a decline in younger people. We are more racially diverse, and this is a huge boil down of the diversity of which we are, because we kind of put it in 2 buckets: white, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, and everybody else. Huge rise in the Hispanic population. Gender here, I look at a different timeline because women enter the workforce en masse between the 50s and the 70s. We have 10 million more degrees earned by women since 1982 out there. This is an incredible amount of talent that is too often sitting on the sidelines. Women have out-earned men in terms of degrees: bachelor's degrees since 82, master's degrees since 86, and doctoral degrees since 2006. Just on master's degrees, it's something like 160 master's degrees go to women for every 100 that go to men. I mean, it's a huge pipeline of talent that we're not tapping. Race, the latest census report, you probably heard, it's the first time there's been a decline in the white population since they've been doing it. I think the thing that's more notable than that is there's no racial majority under the age of 18. That means our diverse workforce isn't coming, it's here. And generation. So I want to give a shout out to Erica Dwan, and I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She coined the term geriatric millennial. She said, that's our leader of the future. They remember dialing up to get their internet. They remember sort of pre-digital, but they're digitally fluid. Their age is like 36 to 40. They're going to start being the leaders who help us fully realize digital transformation. And a note on gender. I just said that all in a way from both a racial and a gender standpoint that was very binary. We are no longer binary in gender. Millennials, 12+% identify as gender nonconforming. Gen Z, 56% know someone who is non-gender binary in their social circle, and 25% expect to change their gender identity. This is from a GLAAD survey. And millennials, 20% are LGBTQ+. This is my community. I'm Gen X. We don't show up anywhere. But I was told there was only 5% of us. So this is a massive shift in gender and sexuality. We also have this fixed occupational identity we start forming when we're young. What do you want to be when you grow up? Kind of absurd if 50% of tasks are going to be outsourced to technology, and therefore 100% of jobs are going to change. We ask university students to pick a major before they step foot on campus, or dial into Zoom. This is absurd across a number of dimensions. One, if you limit your future based on what you're told you're good at in high school, it's a very thin slice of life. I bet none of you in the audience, and certainly not me standing on the stage, I'm standing here because of something they told me I was good at in high school. Also, there's huge social mobility implications. You pick what you see as realistic for you. You pick what you see in your community. You pick what you see as potential. We're cutting off our human potential when we have this mindset. The only survey I've seen on this is this Federal Reserve Bank in New York was that like less than a third of people ever worked in the field of their undergraduate major. And more to the point, most young people today are going to have multiple jobs across multiple industries. It's much more important to prepare them to adapt than any one set of predetermined skills. And then we think about who works. We cannot avoid mental health and burnout. We've been ignoring mental health for a very long time, and I want to highlight these two female athletes who are, Simone is the most decorated athlete in the world, also a sexual abuse survivor and very outspoken. Naomi has struggled with mental health issues. They both have, and they step forward in the biggest moment of their potential competition, both of them, I would say, and said, nope, not doing it, I'm not okay. In Simone's case, she really got beat up because she was part of a team, and they said she let her team down. I would absolutely disagree. She put her team first. She said, I'm not okay, it's not good for the team, I'm going to put my team forward, someone else is going to win the medal, and they should deserve to, and I'm going to step back for the good of me and the good of the team. And I think on that note, let's look at some mental health rates. These are reported by the CDC prior to the pandemic, and these are self-reported, so sometimes you can drop them by half. 6.5% to 8% anxiety and depression, 30 to 37%. When you put anxiety and depression together, it gets to be about 42%. So if you double that, that's a lot of us. And so it brings up the question, is it mental or is it physical? If I have a mental health challenge and I take a pill that has a chemical reaction and it changes things, is it mental or is it physical? We act like the physical is something you can't control and the mental is something you can control. We need to get past that. We also think about mental health benefits as companies as that's for the employee. That's something we give up to get them to work for us. Really? If the good mental health of your team is essential for the success of your team, mental health benefits are benefits for the company, and we need to start thinking about it that way. So let's talk about what we do for work. So this is work, it's a box, it's a job description. It's usually defined by the last occupant, which means it's filled with biases and expectations that may not be necessary, because this is work, and those are skills. And you folks know out there, you fix things in open source, you jump into things, you explore, not because somebody said this is your job description and this is what you should do. You figure it out as you go along, and that's what much more work's going to be like. I don't even know if we need job descriptions anymore, maybe team descriptions, because I don't know how relevant that box is anymore. It encompasses a small set of what we are, and we often pick it based upon the last thing we needed. By the time you hired somebody for it, it's kind of irrelevant. And we're moving from a world that's complicated. This job descriptions worked in this kind of world. It doesn't work in this kind of world. And whether you look at it in terms of job description or you look at it in terms of leadership, I've spoken to so many senior executives who said to me, that one right there, the squirrely lines, that's me right now. Everybody who reports to my team now has skills and knowledge I don't have. I'm not the set expert anymore. I don't know what to do. So we're going to have to learn to think differently in a VUCA world. I also want to give sort of a description here. I use the word capacity, and I realize it's been misunderstood. So capacity is kind of the number of things that a container or a space can hold. It's kind of the amount you can do. That's not what I mean. This capacity which is your ability to understand or do something. So your mental capacity, your intellectual capacity, your wellness capacity, or your ability to meet the moment. So when I talk about capacity, that's the way I talk about it. We are entering the fourth industrial revolution. The first was mechanical, second industrial, third the internet. The fourth is a digital convergence. Now, the fourth industrial revolution is not a perfect way of explaining everything that's going on, but I find it really helpful to talk about skills. So in the first and second industrial revolution, you kind of learned a skill or a set of skills, and you repeated them for a lifetime. Your identity, your set occupational identity, was often multi-generational. The third, it was sort of pick a good major, pick a good industry, pick a good trade, and climb the career ladder. And now it's a simple thing to say, a hard thing to do. Learn, adapt, and create new value. You folks do that every day. That's what you do in open source. You figure it out as you're going on, you create new value. Oftentimes you don't even know if you're going to be compensated for the value you created. I have another expression. I say the skills gap will never close. And I think that's okay, because a skills gap forms when a human demonstrates a skill, the market values the skill in excess of supply. That's actual progress, if we think of learning as part of work. So it's important to think about skills sort of in levels or buckets. So there's competence. I train you to do something, I give you a question, you can give me the right answer. You can perform a task to a benchmark level. You can draw on your existing knowledge. This is what we really did in the first and second industrial revolution. It's still going to be part of work, but reskilling is not going to get us out of here. And then there's capable. That's the ability to sort of sort through, well, let me understand the question a little better, or let me formulate an answer by these two pieces of existing knowledge. It's translating your competencies to new challenges. It's translating and deepening your existing knowledge. It's getting another certificate or degree. And this is kind of what upskilling is. And it was really the domain of the third industrial revolution. And then there's capacity in the way that I just defined it. And that's the ability to formulate a question, find and frame new challenges, formulate entirely new answers. And this is the domain of what I call the human capital era. I think we're on the cusp of one of the greatest eras in history, where humans are the source of value and we treat them like that asset to develop rather than the cost to contain. So I want to talk about chickens for a second, and that might seem out of place. Actually, I want to talk about hens. So I learned about this from Margaret Hefferman. She's brilliant. If you don't follow her, she did a great TED Talk, covers a lot of this stuff. I also, through her, got introduced to Dr. William Muir, who's an evolutionary biologist. And in the 80s, Dr. Muir wanted to study whether or not we could breed productivity into animals. It was kind of when we were in the eugenic, creepy phase of life. And so he did this across, he told me, every species over 40 years with the same results. Here's the idea. Hens are kept in a flock of 9. And his idea was, we'll pluck the most productive hen, the one that lays the most eggs, put them in a flock with a whole bunch of other super hens, and breed the productivity into them so that we have hens that produce more and more eggs. So when he went back to check on them, not only were there not more eggs, only 3 of them were alive. The other 6 had pecked each other to death. And this happened repeatedly. As it turns out, the super productive hen in a forced productive environment is so because it's a sociopath. It's a bully. It suppresses the productivity of the rest of the flock. This is what we're doing in work. This is what we're doing in school. In parallel, he did another experiment where he looked at the flock itself that was collectively the most productive, and then bred that flock. Over a couple generations, he saw a 160% increase in productivity. It's not the individuals, it's the groups. You folks know that. So I say, are you creating a super chicken Hunger Games at work? We are. So why do we work 8 hours a day? We work 8 hours a day because Henry Ford discovered in 1914 that all the accidents happened in routine manual labor on the 9th, 10th, and 11th hour. So he capped hours at 8 hours a day, doubled folks' pay, ran 3 shifts, productivity went way up, engagement went up, happiness went up. Okay, I'm from New England. This is Brady. We're still mourning him going away. But I'm also a fan of Nate Silver, and he said, in 3 hours and 23 minutes in a game, there are 100 minutes of commercials, and there are 18 minutes that the ball's moving. I just throw that out there because it's kind of interesting when we're tracking time. And then when it comes to work, in an 8-hour day, 2 hours and 53 minutes of work actually gets done. This is kind of just like Rain Man data, but is time even really a relevant measure? Why are we still using time? I know there is some time-bound work, but most of us are not doing time-bound work. Cognitive labor breaks down differently. Creative labor breaks down in about 4 hours, and other types of cognitive labor in under 6. There was a very big study in Iceland. 1% of their population, they took off Fridays. People worked 32 hours a week. Same pay, productivity went up, engagement went up. Microsoft in Japan did the same thing, same results. Why are we doing this? Why are we grinding people down to a stump and tracking hours? Part of, I think, what we need to shift in terms of how we work is how we prepare folks for work. So it used to be like this: education, career, retire. Whether you went to university or not, it was the first third of your life. You didn't need to know how you learned beyond that because you just got on the career ladder, collect a pension, and by design you died a year later. That's how we picked pension age. Success measures there are, do we codify and transfer the right predetermined skills and existing knowledge in you? That was it. That was the job. Now it looks more like this. Life expectancy is not 90 yet for everybody, but we're trending that way. We backslid a bit in Corona, but overall we're trending about a decade longer in lives and then therefore in careers. Education becomes learning to imply there's no end state, the way becoming educated suggests. Work becomes leverage to signal that work and learning are now a combined act. And then longevity becomes a reality because we didn't plan for, save for, not only financially, but we can't afford it cognitively or psychologically. 1 in 5 folks are going to have dementia. Part of that is disengagement. So it's going to look more like this. And success measures here are, can you adapt through those different engagements, which could all be in the same company, could be multiple companies at once. Everybody's journey is going to be different, but it's going to be marked much more on how you adapt through these different experiences as opposed to getting on any ladder and working your way up. And I think about it like an iceberg, and I think we're upside down on it. So the top of the iceberg, out of the water, are the skills to do, the perishable skills of technology. Because technology skills depreciate, any one of them. One technology skill gets replaced by another technology skill. So it's your ability to acquire and unlearn those technology skills that's your hallmark. At the waterline, which we're starting to pay attention to, uniquely human skills and traits. Some people call them soft skills. I call them enablers because they make you better at your job. They also make you a better human. Creativity, collaboration, communication, empathy. Below that is a concept, there's mindset, there's Carol Dweck's mindset, and then I do something called the agile learning mindset, which is not only your ability to see that your potential is not limited, but your ability to understand how you create value. Because gone are the days where you can say, I don't know what my company does, but here's my job and here's how I create value. No. You have to understand your company, how it creates value, its business model, how you contribute to that business model, because it's inevitably going to change, and you're going to have to change with it or ahead of it. So you need a market and self-awareness. Below that is a resilient adaptive identity, and this is a connection to the fuel source that helps you learn and adapt, that helps you become self-propelled. And it's a resilience as well as an understanding of your sense of purpose. So the road ahead in terms of how we work shifts from what I say me to we. The challenges we have ahead of us require us to work together the way you folks have been doing forever. Managing and ending this pandemic. No one person, no one country, no one state can do this. Mitigating climate change. There is no backyard. Going to space. I looked it up. 12,000 of you have badges because you helped the Mars rover, drone. That was an open source project. Our space exploration depends on you. Addressing income inequality. No longer just a moral issue. It's about a 1% drag on GDP in the US. And then the future or futures of work is going to require all of us to figure this out. So the challenges ahead of us require collective intelligence and collaboration, the kinds of ways you're already working. So we're also entering the human capital era from a financial perspective. So this is a recalculation of the S&P 500, the enterprise value of all the companies on the S&P 500 from 1935 to 2018. 1935, 100% of value came from physical, tangible assets, because we made stuff. In that, humans were a cost to contain. You can see the decline. It's part of a shift from a manufacturing to a service and a knowledge society. It's also a realization that Milton Friedman wasn't right. Milton Friedman was an economist who said the only social responsibility of a company is to return profits to shareholders at all costs, legally. The Business Roundtable, which is a collection of the CEOs of the largest companies in America, got together in 2019 and said, it's not working anymore. We have to declare an end to the shareholder value era. During that period of time, John Hagel from Deloitte recalculated the return on assets of public companies and found they declined by 75% during this period of time. We weren't creating more value, we were just extracting more value. And in that period of time, as humans were creating more and more value, we treated humans as a cost to the contain. So in 2020, the SEC came out, Securities and Exchange Commission came out and said, now all public companies have to disclose their human capital on their investor 10K statements. Nobody knows what this means yet, but it's a signal that investors are starting to see that humans are the most important asset in an organization. So that's when I said 2021, we're on the birth of the human capital era. So let's look at where we work. So we worked in a farm, then in a factory, then in an office, then in home. Will the metaverse be next? I have no idea. I would love to hear from you folks on what you think. I just got my Quest headset. I'm trying this stuff out. I'm not sure. Is it going to be Google Starline? Is it going to be something else? I think there's something else that's coming. I just don't know what it is yet. But I want to make a point because everything I've heard from people is we've got to get back in the office. We've got to be there 40% of the time or 20% of the time. We pick these artificial numbers because we say we can only innovate when we're together. We can only innovate when we're in person. And then I said, well, wait a minute. What are the top 10 populations in the world right now? 2 of them are countries. The rest are social media platforms. Now, you may say those are not communities, but there are communities. If you've ever played around with WeChat, it is freaky. There is so much depth and complexity to that application in terms of how it knits everything together. And we are forming more psychologically connected, for some, relationships with people we've never met because we're not seeing each other. So what's happening in this virtual world where we're creating these communities? And to that same point, it was a little before my time as a Gen Xer, but and I forgot the label here. So the first is heterosexuals, the second is same-sex couples, where they meet. Increasingly, we're meeting online. Not only are we meeting online, we're forming, emotionally intimate relationships with people, sometimes before we even meet them. So if our most important relationships are being formed before we met, and our largest populations are virtual, where does place come into play? And I just leave that out there as a provocative question because I don't have the answer. So let's talk about why we work. So first we work for survival, then we looked for identity and status, and now we're seeing a big generational shift between the boomers in leadership and millennials. Again, Gen Z, we just get skipped over. But millennials have a much greater, on average, sense of purpose when it comes to work. We've also had 18 months where we've all been sitting at home saying, is this really worth a third of my life? And that's where the Great Resignation is coming in. I also want to note the latest Edelman Trust Barometer is starting to see that investors and customers are seeing employees as the greatest source of value. So the greatest source of long-term value for shareholders and investors is employees for the first time. The greatest factor in trust in brands, they asked investors, they said, you can increase your valuation, you can get more customers, or you can get the talent you need for long-term value and the unknown. 74% of them said, I want that talent. It's more important than me than anybody else. And then they asked customers and they said, what's the greatest factor for you to have trust in a brand? And they said employee safety and security. Not just physical safety, but also financial security after the pandemic. So how are we doing? We're actually 2% more engaged, according to Gallup, through the pandemic. Some of that might be a little, I can't lose my job right now, panic. Because 57% of us are stressed out. We are the most stressed out country in the world. 50% of the folks surveyed by Microsoft working today. This is not the folks on the sidelines. Folks working today said they want to change jobs to get a company that better aligns, or an organization that better aligns with their values. So to bring it back to where we started, I think where is going to be hybrid and virtual. We'll have unique augmented experiences of some sort, I think. Who works? Diversity is a chemical change. It's not an additive process. We have taken the sort of straight white male perspective and then layered things in, and we need to change how we make decisions. There's so much data that diverse teams, whether it's gender diversity or racial diversity or neural diversity, changes the decision-making process in an organization, makes for better creativity and collaboration, better financial performance, because basically your company inside looks like the customers you serve outside, and your decision-making process, you check your blind spots. I have blind spots. I need someone who looks and acts and eats and prays differently than me to help me check those blind spots. How? I think it's time to maximize human potential. If I were a politician, I would run on the platform of creating more taxpayers. That's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to help more folks. There's too much talent on the sidelines, whether it's gender, race, neurodiversity. In fact, if you are autistic, you're more likely to be disabled when we need your talent right now. So I could say that across a number of different dimensions. And we need new measures. Time and productivity, I think, are kind of dead. I did a 30-minute talk for you. Is that better than a 10-minute talk? Or would a 90-minute talk be better? We have this kind of volume approach to productivity when actually we might want to take a quality and engagement approach. And then what we do, one of my mantras is, we learned once in order to work in the past. Now we're going to work in order to learn continuously. And the emphasis is really on collaboration and exploration. And then why we work, I think we're seeing a huge increase in folks interested in having purpose and driven impact as opposed to status drivers. In fact, the latest Gallup poll said that if you have an engaged worker, you're going to have to increase their salary more than 20% to try to dislodge them from that company. If you have a disengaged worker, you could actually offer them lower pay to get them out of there. We got to start paying attention to that. So this is my take. Please take to Twitter or anything else. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think your most precious resource is your time, as an individual and as an organization. It's finite. It's non-renewable. I just asked you for 30 minutes of your time. I hope this was worth it, because I'm asking you for something you can't get back. Mindfully manage your time as individuals and as organizations. Our most valuable asset, I think, is trust. It's what people buy. People buy you because they trust you. The product or service is a souvenir from them. People buy into you because they trust you. They join you, they lead you, they follow you, they vote for you. Think about in every interaction, am I building trust or am I burning trust? Where is trust in this interaction? And then I think your most essential investment is your capacity, back to the way I defined it before, your ability to meet the moment, and that's why I say work to learn. That's how you're creating all your future value. And with that, I thank you very much for that 30 minutes you can't get back.
Thank you.
Sure.
Pretty impressive. Walking through that is inspirational to me. I mean, and also sort of complementary to what you mentioned several times is these folks are sort of ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
In terms of working around the clock, doesn't really keep track of time when these things go across multiple time zones all over the world. But I will say this: even this community is a little stressed out.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I have a good friend who works for a company that is making one of the essential solutions in the coronavirus, and even they said they're taking 5 days off. And she said, but I got all this stuff to do. She said, I don't care. We're not going to do good work if we're burnt out. And they're closing their doors for 5 days, shutting everything down. You can't answer an email, you can't do anything. So do that for yourselves. We need you to. Take care of yourselves.
I want to ask you one question, because
Sure.
I've got you, and then we got to move on. One of the things about people in the open source community is they're kind of accidental heroes. Where they've built this software, and all of a sudden it's running like half of society's computing systems. And more people want to participate in that, but the person who's been maintaining that code is inundated with all this inbound information. Like, what just simple advice would you give to folks that are just all of a sudden like, what happened? Now everyone's interested in what I'm doing and I can't keep up with that.
Any way you can help somebody find an entry point into this world, particularly someone who's not represented in this world, because we're coding our bias into the things, you know that. And the more we can help people who look different than me, that look different than you, or I'm LGBT, maybe somebody like me across some dimensions, is going to be really important. I don't know how to manage all that inbound interest, but I'm excited that there is inbound interest. I think we just have to be mindful of getting more folks to participate, because we've got too much potential on the sidelines. And you guys absolutely are these silent superheroes that most people don't even know about.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little later about some things that we're doing to get more people into this community from diverse backgrounds. So I appreciate your talk. I enjoyed it watching backstage. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Our next speaker is someone who I have known for more than a decade. He has been a leader in our community. He chaired the original Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Now he continues to be a member of the board. He chairs the OpenJS Foundation. Todd Moore is a vice president at IBM, has been one of the early leaders in open source and kind of merging community with IBM's business goals. He's here to talk today. Please welcome Todd Moore.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I am so happy to be here. I was tired of recording my talks and putting them out there, so it's great to be in front of folks and to have a chance to maybe help a little bit on that collaboration discussion that Heather was having at the end of her talk. So today I got an announcement, and that's always fun to go and do. But first I want to start a little bit with the life cycle of AI, because the announcement gets to that. The pillars that all of us depend on, because we're all in search of automating decision making, right? To make it something that speeds up our society and helps us, right? So we've got to get data, we've got to build models, and then we've got to get those deployed, and we've got to maintain this whole thing. Rinse and repeat keeps going and going, right? We all know this is, what happens out in AI these days. But if we take a little deeper look into pipelines, right? Just think about all the steps that you have to go through in order to cleanse that data, to get it through and transformed into something that's useful, to get it into a model, to train that model, to figure out that, oops, I got to go do that again, to scale it all up, to finally get it served out there and deployed either to an edge device or into the cloud, and then, of course, monitor it and fine-tune it, rinse, repeat, just do this all over again. And think about all of us duplicating that across the world in our own individual silos, not necessarily collaborating, not necessarily very efficient at this at all, right? So what do we really need? We need a very efficient process. We need a repository that allows us to have trusted data sets, licensed in a way that can be shared and broadly used, models that are well governed, that we can work with, that are transparent, that are available to all to go to use as a basis of getting started. And of course, the ability to have pipelines to speed this process along, make it efficient, break down the barriers and the duplication that are happening across the organizations, right? So those are all the things that we need to have. We need to have a place to go do it in a neutral place so that we can trust it, we can register things within it, we can track the governance of it, the provenance of it, and in the end, produce ethical artifacts that we as individuals working in this field can feel comfortable with, right? Because society demands that of us these days. So what are we doing? Here's my announcement, right? The Machine Learning Exchange. We've teamed up with LF AI and Data, and we've taken assets that we've had within IBM, our Model Asset Exchange, our Data Asset Exchange, and then we've, of course, been working out in the open on projects like Elira and pipelines and KF serving and other things. And we brought that together with the folks in LF AI and Data. And if you look at ml-exchange.org, you'll find something new. So what's in there? Well, of course, pipelines, right? Pipelines are what's helping us to go and put this together and make it run smoothly and quickly. Data sets, right? Lots of data sets. Some really cool data sets you'll see in a second here. Notebooks, because you can't just put things out there. You have to be able to explain them and use them and have flows and point to other information and show how things are put together. And then, of course, models. Models are the basis of how we get things done, right? Automate those decisions for us. So looking underneath the covers, once you get below the UI layer and the API server, you find that Kubeflow pipelines on Tecton is one of the key elements of this, right? We've been working together with the community there for a while now to go and pull that together so that you have a smooth path to deployment across Kubernetes, which has just come to dominate the world, and OpenShift. So working together with our team, you find in our new machine learning exchange sample code so you can train and validate and serve up your models, data sets and notebooks, all available, put together on Kubeflow pipelines on Tecton, and using KF serving underneath the covers. And of course, this all works through a pre-registration process for the data sets and the models. And you too will be able to go and register your work up there and have it available for others to go and work with. So this is how we're going to go share this with the world and to break down some of the barriers around collaboration. So taking a little look underneath the covers here on pipelines, right, you'll find that one of my favorite ones, Trusted AI pipeline, is there as well too. We have a real commitment to ethical AI. Trusted AI has become the cornerstone, I believe, of how we as a community will be able to face all of the rest of the world and explain to them, help them understand, make them feel comfortable with the decisions and the things that are happening within the AI models that we put up there. And we've already seen within LF AI and data a lot of work happening in that regard. So go take a look at the art tools that are there. And what you'll find, though, is the Trusted AI pipeline is there. You can go get started with it. You can see all of the artifacts that you would want to have as someone who is picking this up and making use of it. Models. You can't run things without models. You'll find quite a few models within the library that's there. They're all prepackaged. Of course, again, you can register your own models. You can run your own pipelines, right? Here's an example of a text sentiment classifier that's there. You can see all the definitions. You can see the sample serving code. You can actually go and launch it and run it and take advantage of it and do it very, very quickly. And I think this is important, right? It's the speed by which we can go and take advantage of these things that will help us as fellow developers out there to work quickly with them and get others engaged in working with us. Data sets, right? Data sets are pretty cool, right? You got to have data. It's got to be licensed under things like the CDLA that have been put together with the LF. So please go and explore that if you want to put data out there. I highly recommend that effort. It was done with 45 other companies and their lawyers, and you know how long it takes lawyers to talk and work on things. But in the end, it got done, and I think the CDLA is a great thing. So here's an example of NOAA weather data that's up there, and of course you can see all the different data set tasks, and you can actually go and run output against it quickly. See the visualizations as well too. So it's neat. It's great stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about data sets, though. One really significant one there you see in the top left is Project CodeNet, right? Now, this is something we launched back in May. I don't know if folks recall it or not. Made a pretty good splash, right? Because it's talking about providing AI with what it needs to really go make breakthroughs in coding, right? This is something that's really, really important. The image side of things for classification has had ImageNet, 14 million or so artifacts that allow us to then go and build and train models and do a really good job of that. Because those things are important, right? If you've got an automated vehicle or something who's driving around, you want to make sure that it understands what it's seeing and what it's doing, as an example, right? So this impacts our lives. But there's other problems that need to be solved, right? And there's efficiencies the developers can gain, right? Code translation from one language to another, why should one developer be doing that? Why can't he hand that off to an AI tool to go do that for him, right? Performance improvements, right? Just helping coders know what's out there and what they can do. Code classification. All these things are tough problems that we can work on together and collaborate on as a result of having a big data set. So what is CodeNet? So CodeNet is big. It's 14 million code samples, right? It's 4,000 plus code problems. It's 55 programming languages. It's 500 million lines of code, right? This is the biggest thing that we have put out there, and it's available to everyone through GitHub right now, right? It's a diverse set of problem codes. You can find things to solve just about anything in there. I really, really encourage you to go poke around. I'll show a little bit more in a second. But it's all really well tested, and I think that's really important, right? You can't put out examples without having the test cases that help to go and support that so that you can recreate and do the work that you want to go and do. Every problem comes with the test set. So, what do we have? We have the largest AI for code open source data set available today, and it's available on the Machine Learning Exchange, right? I think this is so important, right? Because this is now out there and all the sub-projects that go with it, things like the language classifier that's up on the screen right now, are available to you. And they're available with notebooks, right? So you can go off and pick up the notebook and go in depth into how this is put together, all the definitions, go look through the code, be able to deploy it, and work with the Jupyter tool set, the Elira tool set, to go and modify pipelines to build things, to deploy these things, to make this useful to you and do it in a rapid fashion. So we have the ability now to go work out in the open together to go solve problems in AI coding and do it with a data set that will be incredibly useful to us. And those artifacts start with looking at the model exchange, right? Machine Learning Exchange, I'm sorry. So, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about what's coming next, because I think that while we're thinking about solving all the problems in AI and coming together and working together and finding a path to tackle the things in the world, quantum computing is coming at us and coming at us very, very quickly. IBM has had access to our quantum computers through the cloud for 4 years now, right? 2 billion circuit runs a day are done against those cloud assets that people are doing. How are they doing it? Well, they're working with open source. There's an open source project out there for quantum. It's one that I would hope that eventually also serves many different types of quantum hardware underneath. Right now, it's specific to ours. And you too can go pick it up, run it. There's Python libraries as well to go with this to do a variety of different tasks. And play with a quantum computer online yourself, right? Run tasks against it. Be one of those 2 billion transactions a day that happen as a result of being online. I think this is a tool for the world. I highly encourage all of you to think about how to get yourself quantum ready. Go out, look at some of the classwork, become certified in it. We offer a badging program. Make sure that you're thinking about this as you're moving forward, because you saw in that last presentation that we're in a path to continuously learn, right? We have to collaborate together to solve these very large problems that are out in front of us. And we've got new tools coming that we're all going to have to be aware of and understand and participate with. So there's your chance to get going with that, right? And guess what? On the Machine Learning Exchange, you will find that the Qiskit neural network and other projects are available to you for download so that you can get going with those notebooks and get started in this as well too. So a little bit of your future is there as well. It's not just the things that you're trying to accomplish with AI technology today. So to that end, within IBM, there's a lot of us who are here giving talks. Around these topics, you'll find that many of the team are out there. Animesh and company, I highly recommend that you find Animesh or Tommy Lee or one of the others if you want to understand in depth some of these technologies. Their talks are listed on the page here. They've been the ones putting this together, working together out in the open, working with LFAI and data to actually bring up that exchange and make it available to you. So pat them on the back because I think they really deserve it. It's a great piece of work that they've gone and done, and I really appreciate all the activities there. And if you want to find out more, here's some links. Of course, start out with the Machine Learning Exchange. You can find them on GitHub. You can also get going with the Slack that's been set up. Project CodeNet is available there on GitHub as well too. KissKit, as I said, has been there for a while, and of course, the folks who have been doing this within my team are from the Center for Open Data and AI Technology. Please come and take a look at it. We've got lots of other good material and things to help you along your path as well, too. So we need to collaborate together. We need to learn together. We need to take advantage of these technologies that sit in front of us. And hopefully you saw just a little bit of that today of how we're putting things out there so that we can collaborate out in this neutral, really great home that I believe is now the center of gravity for doing open source AI development. And certainly the place to find models and data and pipelines. The LF AI and Data group is going to be essential to our shared journey as we go through this into the future. So, thank you very much. That's my announcement and my talk, and I appreciate you all spending a few minutes here online with us or in the room to hear me out. So thank you.
Thanks, Todd. The CodeNet thing is really interesting, like just the amount of data that you're sharing out there.
It's immense, yeah.
But one of the things that's interesting is IBM, in partnership with a whole bunch of other organizations, did a ton of work to get that data out into the open.
Yeah.
The common data licenses needed to be sort of figured out.
We've been on a journey to go do this, yes. And you guys have been right there with us. So.
But I don't think a lot of people realize, like, to share data, whether it's in CodeNet or things like our OS Climate Initiative, which are sharing these big climate change data sets with financial services companies, you have to have similar licenses to open source licenses, like the Apache license or GPL and so forth. And so, I want to thank IBM for helping all of us to figure out, our common data licenses and how to do this kind of sharing. So terrific work.
Well, thank you. And, we knew we needed to do it in order to move this forward, and we're happy to help and go make that happen. So it's been great doing it. So thank you.
Key question: When are we all going to need to be quantum ready?
Over the next 5-10 years, you're going to see a big set of changes here.
Yeah.
And you need to start getting ready now.
All right.
You need to understand it. You need to start to immerse yourself. It's time. It's time to get going.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is from SUSE. For those of you who've been around the Linux community for a very long time, SUSE has been one of the major Linux distributions out there. Now they are far more than just Linux. They're working on IoT, cloud computing solutions, and more. Brent Schroeder is the SUSE CTO, and he is going to come out and talk about open and interoperable code and how those solutions can meet all of our needs. Please welcome Brent. There he is.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to actually be back in person and collaborating, and even though the prior speaker talked about the virtual communities, there's nothing quite like personal interaction and sitting down with people. What I want to talk about today for just the next few minutes is about why IT leaders are choosing open source. We recently did a survey of 800 plus IT leaders from companies that are 250 employees or greater to understand their needs in innovation, how they view open source, how they view different technologies, and what they're choosing, what their thought process is in their choices. So I wanted to share some statistics from that survey with you. As you can imagine, everybody, it's always, businesses and IT organizations are always under pressure for more tangible outcomes. How can they deliver more faster? And you can imagine with the pandemic, that's only accelerated. Projects that historically somebody may have wanted to schedule and tackle over the course of a year have needed to been done in months or even weeks, not just to compete, but to survive as they look at the changing dynamics of businesses. And as we talked with and surveyed the IT leaders, 76% of them said that the pressures that they're under today are even more than they were just 12 months ago. So that's just continuing to accelerate in the complexity of the environment that they're in. So how are IT leaders responding, and what are they choosing to address this as they need to innovate with new solutions, new ways to market, new ways to interact with customers. And the great, I guess, aspect for us as open source collaborators is that the vast majority of IT leaders now recognize open source as the vehicle for innovation. And the majority are even looking at, if they've got proprietary software, then how can they migrate that to open source, where there's opportunities to move those to an open source project. Many of them are tackling that. And you can look at some of the new technologies, the growth of containers and Kubernetes combined with Linux. And if you look at a project like Edge, it's one of the new kind of frontiers, if you will, of how do I take and get closer to the customers, how do I interact faster, how do I operate in disconnected environments with intelligence. Open source allows a company to have a degree of flexibility in the devices that they support and attach to, in the numerous communication models and optimizing communication through often disconnected or poorly connected environments, being able to respond in real time, to be able to span the huge growth or huge number of devices and locations that a company may need to address in an edge environment. And open source gives them the flexibility to adapt the solutions to their environment, to optimize, to innovate faster, to not have to wait for that next year from now release of proprietary software. So it's that flexibility that we find as one of the key drivers to deliver cost-effective innovation. And the good news is that IT leaders continue to be very optimistic about the future of open source and where they can apply it and how it applies to them. And I think one of the key aspects that I see in reflected in a proof point of this is not just the adoption of the technologies that we as the industry communities develop, but the growing number of user-centric or application or industry-centric communities. I'm seeing new communities in financial, FinOS, growing communities or emerging communities in automotive. That the vendors and the end users are collaborating in how do they solve problems specific to an industry and sharing that as open source models. So I think that's a real testament to the work that we've done, the foundations that we as communities have built over the past several years or decades even now, being able to talk about it moving into the third decade, and the optimism of that. One thing that was a caution in the survey is the concern that as more and more big tech join, will that undermine the openness and the collaboration? Does that put the history, the ethos of open source at risk? And my personal view of that is no, it should not. We're a community of millions of members, of tens of thousands of companies and of individuals. And we need to keep in mind as we're collaborating, regardless of the size of the company, of why open source has been so successful. And if we continue to adhere to those principles, I think the future of open source will just continue to be the model for more and more innovation and how companies choose to innovate, whether it's at the infrastructure level, whether it's at the middleware level, or now at the application and end user level. So with that, I want to leave with just a couple of final thoughts of summarizing, why do IT and business leaders really gravitate to open source? And it's not because of technology. A business leader is concerned about that, the business. And how do they drive new sources of revenue? How do they improve customer experience? How do they scale the business? And that's what their driver is. And so we, as the technology side of the world, the innovators, the collaborators, we need to keep that in mind of how do we help the IT leaders and business leaders achieve those objectives while continuing to live the mantra of open source and collaboration and driving innovation, enabling innovation of the future. So with that, I really look forward to the next day or two on collaborating in person, hearing other people talk, seeing what's new, and working with you guys, not only at this conference, but going forward into the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So our next speaker is Wim Coekaerts, who is a senior vice president at Oracle. For people who have been in Linux and the kernel community in particular for a long time, Wim needs very little introduction. Wim is truly a hacker's hacker. He is to this day still active in coding. I tried to talk him into talking about his off-the-grid home that he built down in California that is insane, with its own mini power grid and solar array and microwave and all of this really amazing technology that he has put together as his hobby. But I think he's going to talk about more mainstream issues around open source and open collaboration. Wim is also the vice chairman of the Linux Foundation. Please welcome Wim Coekaerts.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, good morning. Wow, it's a bit of stage fright here, and it's been a long time since I was on stage last, and I'm actually wearing jeans for the first time in, I don't know, a year and a half. Anyway, good morning. I wore shorts, Anyway, so good morning. It's Seattle, it's a rainy day, and we're at an open source conference, so I figured talking about something related to clouds would actually be very topical. So I don't have slides, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. I have about 5 minutes to talk. Look, a few years ago, I think about 5 years ago, I was in Palo Alto at it was a venture capital conference, and there was a panel with Martin Mikos talking about open source and cloud computing. And the topic at the time was that lots of open source companies, so basically folks that build a product that's completely open, they were saying that they're very concerned that as they get successful, that the cloud vendor would basically take it and make more money than the company itself. And so it was sort of the first time for me, about 5 years ago, that I heard something that said cloud companies might be a threat to open source. And so what I wanted to talk about today was sort of saying, well, from what I've learned over the last few years, it's actually quite the opposite. I think there's a lot of positive news that can come from cloud companies and cloud vendors as it's related to open source, and it's actually going to be, I think, a very positive environment in the next few years, and of course longer term in the future. Because whatever you hear in the news tends to be negative, right? In the last several months, there have been a number of occasions where this came up again, where cloud vendors taking in a popular open source project, and then it's implied that it's sort of taken over. Anyway, I'm not loud enough. All right, sorry. Thank you. First of all, one of the things with open source and cloud vendors is that, as you know, a lot of the stuff in the back end is open source. And what typically tends to happen is that as developers build new services, they're under a time crunch. They need to get a lot of these pieces together, cobble it together, and build a service that then gets used by the customers and the end users. And in the early days, from what I've seen personally, is that a lot of folks don't contribute back. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't have time. right? Initially, they're really trying to get the service up and running, and they're spending the time and figuring out how that works really well. They do the control plane integration and so forth. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that for the most part, when these developers get the service up and then they have to start doing maintenance and they have to keep up with the open source pieces that they're relying upon, certainly the ones that are visible to the customers, they have to really start keeping up with the upstream releases. Right? No matter what the product is, there's security updates, there's new functionality, and if folks don't contribute patches back upstream, it becomes harder and harder to maintain in-house. And I think that one of the nice things with open source and the really fast pace of development is that it sort of forces companies that rely on it to actually have to contribute. If you don't go upstream, you basically screw yourself long term. You have a lot more work to do on maintenance, you have a lot more work to do on doing backports and so forth. And so while that might be interesting initially, whether it's for timing purposes or whatever else reason, over time it will catch up. And I think that at least from a development point of view, as a lot of as a lot of cloud vendors start using more and more open source stuff, it will converge back to a model where everybody is basically contributing back because it's in the interest of the vendor itself as well. It saves them money. Right? And one of the good examples of that, of course, is Linux, where pretty much everything goes upstream first and then it goes into whatever folks use. Then the second part is that cloud vendors have a lot of potential and already happening to contribute back based on scale. Right? We have thousands and thousands and thousands of server running stuff. We find all these bugs. We find bugs in deployments. Performance-related things when we're running VMs at scale, how can we optimize and get the best performance out of virtual machines? And probably the most important one here is security. Right? A cloud vendor will lose face publicly if there's any sort of significant security incident. And so the fact that everything gets scrutinized over and over again is actually very valuable because a lot of security vulnerabilities get discovered in cloud environments and they get fixed and then they go upstream. And so I think that's a really interesting one where the contributions can be very high. The other thing is supply chain. You know, one of the things that's always been a struggle in some ways with Linux is, you know, making sure we're on the latest hardware, all the device drivers are open source, and getting all the vendors that provide hardware to get the source code for the drivers in good shape. And so from a cloud vendor point of view, you really want to control what the software is and you want to be able to audit the code in there and so forth. And so there's a big push from the cloud vendors to ensure that device drivers and all the stuff that's installed on a system is basically open source and contributed back. And so I think there's more work to do here in terms of supply chain. I think that was an important topic just recently, but there's a big role that cloud vendors can and should and are playing in that space as well. There's a real need for openness and around that from a security point of view in particular. And then the other part on the security thing is that when a cloud vendor uses open source products or components in their service, you know, they're responsible for it. You can't point fingers to someone else saying, oh, that's not our piece of code, it's their fault. If your service is compromised, it's your customers. Right, and you're losing face. So whenever these bigger companies are using open source components in their stack, they really have to take ownership of that and make sure that that's really well done and not just point fingers to someone else. And then it comes back to, if you have a lot of fixes in-house, you can't keep up with the upstream version unless you contribute all this stuff back. So I think there's going to be a really good synergy or a continued synergy in that space. Another thing that has been very visible, at least from my personal experience at work, use MySQL as an example. So we have MySQL, which is of course an incredibly popular open source database out there used by millions and millions of people. And then we also build a cloud service. A lot of the work around the cloud service is the control plane. The engineers are figuring out how to best install it, upgrade it with as little downtime as possible, doing extra security audits and all this stuff. And so it's an interesting experience to see the development team of a product also create a service. they suddenly become users of the product that they've worked on for many, many years. And now they see the whole thing in a whole different light, in a good way. And so all those changes that they're making basically is now going into MySQL, the open source version, and goes to everyone else out in the world that's using it on premises. Right? And so I think there's a really good benefit for developers to have sort of direct experience basically running the product that they have been building themselves. And not just, basically writing code and shipping it to someone else. They actually have the experience. And that will provide a lot of good feedback back to the products that are being used on premises as well. So you'll see a lot of that continuing. So in general, as I've been sort of following the news and then seeing how things evolve within companies on the use of open source, the cloud vendors are actually contributing quite a bit back, and there's always a lot more work that can be done, but I'm pretty positive that there's no friction and that over time things will just get better and better. So it should be a non-cloudy day, should be a sunny day in the future for all this stuff. Anyway, with that, enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on one second. You've been around the Linux Foundation for such a long time, but I do think you hit on something that early on was always such an important part, which we emphasize so much early about just use the software, adopt it, right? It's free and so forth. And what people finally figured out years later is like, if I don't contribute back, I'm stuck with this unsustainable support burden. So that cycle of sort of projects becoming products, creating value that gets reinvested back, that's actually happening. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a device maker, a cloud vendor, whoever, you pretty much eventually figure this out and have to give back.
You have to, and I think a lot of companies or individuals start out the opposite, and then as they learn that the cost of that is just way too high, it'll change. So I think that the open source development model just kind of changes that around anyway.
Yeah.
And so people are forced to, if they want to have a good margin and they want to stick with their budgets, then they're kind of forced to doing it the right way.
Yeah.
It just takes some time.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah.
Wait for it. They'll give back eventually.
That's
Thanks,
right.
Wim.
Yeah, thank you.
Good stuff. All right, our next speaker is Hilary Carter, who is the new Vice President of the Linux Foundation Research Division. Last year, we decided that open source has, come to this point where it's just a critical part of everybody's lives. It's an important part of the technology supply chain. Technology is important to everyone, and that the Linux Foundation should invest in research to figure out what's going on in our communities and how they could be improved. Hilary joins us with rich experience in these kind of collaborative research efforts from the Blockchain Research Institute, and you are going to see both this year and throughout the next several years, a lot of new research coming out from the Linux Foundation about open source, about cybersecurity, about artificial intelligence, and much, much more. Please welcome Hilary Carter.
Wow, good morning. Open Source Summit. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here to describe the vision and value of Linux Foundation research. Earlier this year, Jim Zemlin and the team at Linux Foundation had a vision, and it was this. What if we created the definitive repository of data and insights in open source? And in doing so, created a whole new set of deliverables that could inform strategy, policy, and decision-making. And what if we build on the work of thinkers such as Eric von Hippel and Karim Lakhani and the work that they did 15 and 20 years ago, but update it for the era in which we're living, an era where a pandemic persists, climate change is bearing down hard in different regions of the world, and digital transformation is accelerating and changing what it means to be a technology company. And so, Linux Foundation Research was born. Our goal is to create a repository of decision-useful data and insights, a set of deliverables that will inform the entire ecosystem, in a more profound way, dispelling myths and misperceptions about what open source is and what it isn't, and what is the value created when we all collaborate together on solving common challenges. Whether those challenges are specific to technology innovation or solving greater global human challenges. So here's how we're going about our work. We're exploring open source along industry vertical lines, looking at open source in financial services, public health, even film and entertainment. We're also looking at open source along technology verticals, exploring cloud, AI, blockchain, and the IoT. And finally, for those topics that don't fall neatly into industry vertical or technology horizontal buckets, we're exploring ecosystem-wide subject matter. For example, on cybersecurity, next month we'll be publishing important work on readiness for software bill of materials in response to the US executive order on cybersecurity. We'll also be exploring issues around identity and governance and climate. So no sooner have I briefly introduced LF Research, but I come to you with an ask. Because research is a team sport. We cannot create rich data and insights without shared contributions from all of you. So here's how you can get involved. First of all, we need good quality data. Whether that data comes from your organization, your repository, or you're taking 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes to complete a survey, we need your insights. So please share your time and talents. There will be no shortage of surveys coming forward in the months and years ahead. So please take some time, share what you know. It's incredibly important. The second way you can get involved is in providing a qualitative interview. This methodology is crucial to providing rich insights into what leaders are thinking, what organizations are thinking, and it's information that we can't readily find through secondary sources. And we'll respect your privacy in the process. All of our contributors may share insights anonymously or with full attribution. So do get involved. Let us know if authorship is of interest, if collaboration and research in another capacity is meaningful to you. Our door is open, and together we can create something valuable, shared value for the ecosystem. So when you think, who is LF Research? We are all LF Research. One of the most important projects we'll be publishing this year is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's coming out in December, and it was a project brought to us by GitHub earlier this spring, who wanted to collaborate with the Linux Foundation to better understand the scope of diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2021, and build on some of the work that they were doing in 2018 on this subject. And so with GitHub's support and the support of more than a dozen other organizations, we were able to translate our DEI survey into 10 different languages and hire additional research support to provide deep analysis into this important subject matter. We launched our survey in July, and within 10 days, we had thousands of respondents. Our final sample is 2,350 survey completes. We've conducted more than 16 interviews from a broad cross-section of our stakeholder groups, and we're really looking forward to telling the story of where we are in terms of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in open source. And with that, I won't be releasing full findings until December, but I am very pleased to be introducing our next speaker, who will be sharing some of the preliminary findings from our DEI survey. GitHub's Senior Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging is Demetris Cheatham. She is responsible for the company's strategy along 4 pillars: people, platform, policy, and philanthropy. Her work includes aligning diversity, inclusion, and belonging to the company's global expansion and plan for the future footprint of its workforce. Please welcome Demetris Cheatham from GitHub.
I am here today to talk about 2 of my most favorite things: diversity and inclusion and open source. And I promise you I'm not just saying that because that's literally my job. So I am the Senior Director for Diversity and Inclusion Strategy at GitHub. So let me tell you, when I was interviewing, I was meeting and talking to Erica Brescia, and she was explaining to me how GitHub aligns its diversity and inclusion strategy across everything that they do. Its platform, its people, policy efforts, and philanthropy. So then Erica asked me that all-important question. So Demetris, tell me why you want to join GitHub. Now, everybody knows this question is coming, but I had just heard how GitHub had this amazing platform of then 50 million developers, now over 65 million developers. And in that moment, I said, Erica, I want to join GitHub because I want to open source diversity and inclusion. And I have to humbly say that it was a great answer because I'm here. So what does open sourcing diversity and inclusion mean? To find that out, we started talking to so many people across the entire open source ecosystem. Many of you who are in this room today and online. And as we had these conversations, there were several themes that started to emerge. First, inclusion happens at the community level. You see, when someone first comes into open source, those first 1 or 2 interactions that they have within those communities, it really sets the tone for whether they feel welcome, they say, these are my people, and they're here to stay. Or if they have these negative interactions, they come in, take a look, and they say, no, this is not for me, and they're gone, oftentimes for good. The second theme was that the maintainer or the community leader, they really drive the inclusive culture within a community. And what these maintainers were telling us was, they said, listen, we have all the resources we need. We have checklists, podcasts, articles, training, conferences, events. Everyone is telling us how to drive a more inclusive culture. But there's something that we're missing. We have a competing priority. We don't have the time. You see, when you're first starting a community, your number one thing is getting as many contributors to your community as possible, no matter where they are or who they are. As the maintainers told me, it's all about getting hands on the keyboard. So you see, there was this natural tension there. So then I said, if resources aren't the issue, what really is going on? And that's when the conversation started to differentiate a bit. When you spoke to the maintainers of the smaller communities, they said, we have the resources, but we just don't have the time or the bandwidth to focus on it. But then when you talk to the maintainers of the larger communities, they say, yes, we have the time, we have the resources, we have the bandwidth, but there's this definite tipping point when your community becomes too large for you to really influence the culture. So you see, there was this thing going on, right? Where the time that you needed to be focused on the culture was a time when you didn't have when you didn't have the time to actually do it. So one of the things that was consistent, though, no matter who we talked to, they said we can create the most inclusive communities ever, but there are significant barriers to access. You can have these amazing, welcoming, everybody's having a good time communities, but if that gate is so high that people cannot get to it, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds or historically excluded backgrounds, then what are we doing here? Are we really solving for anything? And so with that, we are here to introduce All In. All In is a community that's dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in open source by focusing on access, community, equity, and data. And so today I'm going to share with you all what we've been up to in this community and extend an invitation for every single one of you to join us. So here's what we've been up to. We've launched the open source DEI survey in partnership with the Linux Foundation. We have launched a maintainers listening tour, and we are in the middle of a 12-month pilot. So you just heard Hilary introduce the open source DEI survey. We are launching and finalizing the final report in December, but here's what it's telling us early on, some of the preliminary findings. 82% of our survey respondents said, I feel welcome in open source. That's good news, right? I'm telling you, there are companies that will be thrilled if they could have an 82% score on their belonging question in their engagement surveys. So a lot of people would say, hey, 82%, we're doing well, this is great, let's just move on. Let's focus on something else. But that's not the purpose of diversity and inclusion. We want to give voice to the 18% who do not feel welcome in open source. What are their stories? What are they experiencing? What are the behaviors that they're encountering? Because that's where the conversation starts. Because what they are experiencing likely may be the things that's keeping so many others who want to participate in open source from even attempting. So what are the 25% of persons with disability? The 26% of women, 29% of persons of color here in North America, or the staggering 39% of third gender and non-binary contributors? What are they experiencing? That's what we need to solve for in order to create that vibrant diversity and open source that reflects the communities in which we live and we serve. So as we started looking at those intersections, those conversations, those stories, the thousands of comments, the qualitative interviews that we conducted, here were some of the themes. The first, technical skills and knowledge. They were saying if they come into a community and they do not have the technical and skills and knowledge to participate, that they were made to feel inferior. Lack of response and rejections to contributions. 80% said that this was happening occasionally. 40% said that this was happening frequently. If you have people that are contributing to your community, to your projects, and you do not have the time to respond, they are feeling invisible. It's not that they think you're busy or that you're rude. They literally are saying, I am invisible in open source. The next thing that we're hearing is that they feel that their voices aren't being heard or their contributions aren't valued. One direct quote was, if I am not white, if I am not male, if I am not highly educated, if I am not wealthy, they do not want to hear from me in open source. And we know that is not true. Another major theme was around written and spoken language. So many microaggressions, stereotypes, cultural barriers. 46% of those that said they do not feel welcome in open source said that they have experienced language that has made them uncomfortable. So we are celebrating 82%, but we have work to do. We have to get to the point where in open source, inclusion is not the exception. It is the norm. Where we make sure that community hospitality is something that everybody gets to experience. Like the open source community, you receive an immediate welcome from them. Through GitHub Actions, I have to put a plug in there. where it says, "Welcome to our community. We are glad you're here. Your voice is appreciated. Your contributions are welcome. Here are explicit ways in which you can contribute depending on your level of experience." So you are able to make meaningful contributions from day one. They tell you the turnaround time to get a response, and they honor that. That needs to be the norm across all communities. We have to get to the point where there are tools in the hands of every maintainer, like one that my friend Sean Goggins from the Chaos Project introduced me to. This tool runs a real-time report at any given time across the community, and it flags language that may not be inclusive. And so this maintainer is able to do a deep dive into what is happening with the dialogue, which is one of the #1 ways that people leave communities. And we have to make sure that that maintainer is trained with the de-escalation and intervention techniques that they need to make sure they're handling miscommunication in an inclusive way, not an exclusive way. We're talking about accessibility audits, consistent inclusive language scans, enforced code of conduct. These things have to become the norm, not the exception. So what are we doing to make sure that we are supporting these maintainers who are critically important? Well, we're listening to them. We are on a maintainers listening tour, which is a series of focus groups, individual interviews, and there's a link for you to provide feedback online if you aren't able to attend a focus group or interview. Shameless plug. We will be having a focus group later today. Please check in your agenda and join us. We want to hear from you. The next thing that we're doing in All In is we have a 12-month pilot focused on maintainers and another one focused on students. The one for maintainers we are developing with the feedback that we're getting from that maintainers listening tour. But the students, we have kicked off earlier this month, and I can tell you all, these students are freaking amazing. Here's what they are doing over the next 12 months. Actually, they're already a quarter in. From August through December, these students are taking open source education and online curriculum that was generously provided by the Linux Foundation. They are also receiving professional development or career development training, because we all know that you can have the technical skills, but there are some things that you need to know that many of us wish we had known back then when we first started, that they need to understand in order to set them up for success in their career in open source. Then, starting in January, these students are going to participate in a 12-week project with our corporate partners, and the Major League Hacking Program is actually administering this for us. They will get real live experience in open source with a corporate partner for 12 weeks. The students are so excited about that. The purpose of this program is to set these students so that they have a clear pathway to success for an internship position during 2022 with one of these corporate partners. We were very intentional about the schools that we recruited from. We wanted to go to those schools who are often overlooked in the recruiting process for most major companies. These are minority-serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, and we also have one university which was founded for the education of Native and Indigenous students. We also were very specific about the students that we wanted to participate. The stories of the students in this program are those that commute 2 hours to school each and every day because they can't afford to live on campus. Or they are full-time caregivers, especially during this pandemic. Several of them are working full-time in addition to their full-time course loads. They are active duty military. They are also military veterans, reserves. These students are also playing sports because that's how they're on scholarship to attend schools. We have football players. We have a star swimmer. These are students in which life happens, in which sometimes their GPA might not be the indicator of their aptitude for success. They are hardworking, they are dedicated, they are passionate, and they have the will and the drive to want to come and join us in open source. And so we are going to support these students. And I'm delighted that we are supporting these students through an institution of a collection of partners who said that they are all in, that they are going to be with these students from beginning to the end to give them what they need to succeed in open source, to give them that opportunity, to give them that shot. And so I wanted to put this slide up to say, this is what open sourcing diversity and inclusion looks like. We have companies who are not competing for the same talent, but saying that these students being in open source working for any of us is better for all of us. And I asked the design team at GitHub, and they said that there are plenty of opportunities and more space for many more logos. And I hope that the next time I'm before you, there's a whole slide full of names as well. So the one thing that I want you all to take away today, All In is not a program or a set of programs. It's a community. And a community is made up of all of you, of all of us. So to join us, go to www.allinopensource.org, join the community, attend the listening tour later today, become a corporate partner, contribute where it counts, no matter who you are. We have work to do. We have the mission, we have the charge. Let's open source diversity and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amazing. Hang on one second. First of all, this is such a great program. All of you watching online, all of you here, if your company is not a corporate participant or sponsor, come on in. For all of you who work in open source projects, we did surveys on what the motivations are for people. It's creating great code, getting that code adopted, mastering one's craft. It was all these intrinsic motivators. And I want to add one more here, and I think this program will result in it. The gratification of knowing that you've changed someone's life is amazing. Yeah. We did a jobs survey where 90% of the companies responded they're having a hard time hiring open source talent. The opportunity career-wise is huge. With just a little bit of effort, people who participate in these programs, their lives will be permanently changed for the better. So I really encourage you all to participate in this. And Demetris, I want to thank you for just a really tireless work on this. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for being all in, Jim.
Thank you. All right. There we go.
Have a good one.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to take a break. We have a keynote starting again today with Linus Torvalds and Dirk Hondel doing a fireside chat at 2:20 p.m. There is going to be a break for now. Breakout sessions begin at 11, and I'll see you all back here this afternoon. Thank you.
Sending alone conversations with a stranger I barely know, swearing this will be the last, but it probably won't. I got nothing left.